and is being recorded, and we will, and we will be posting it on the NRS webpage for all of you to access and to review. If one of your colleagues was not able to join us on today's call, they'll be able to access it there. We have the website here to remind you in case you've forgotten it. The PowerPoint presentation will be available there as well. As you might have noticed, you're in listen-only mode at this point. We've muted all the lines. We found that's helpful for reducing background noise, but we know that you might have lots of questions as you participate in today's webinar. And so you'll see in the top right-hand side of your screen that there's a Q&A pod. You can submit questions at any time through the webinar, and we will answer both content, or if you have any technical assistance questions that you would need some help with, please put those in there as well. Unfortunately, because we do have a limited amount of time, we will possibly not be able to answer all of them. If you do have a question that we're unable to get to, the benefit of having this Q&A chat pod is that we have a written record of it, and we'll be able to come back to it at the end of, after the session ends, and we will post the responses to those questions online as well as the recording that I mentioned earlier. When you do exit out of today's session, you will notice that there is a pop-up that includes a link to a brief evaluation. We ask that you do fill that out. We are always looking to see how we can better serve you, serve your state, serve your local programs, and so your evaluation is very helpful. I encourage you to especially fill out the open-ended questions to help us improve these webinars. Okay, with that being said, we're going to go ahead and jump in. I know it's been a little while since you participated in your LEAP training, so I'd like you to take a moment now and reflect on which one or two words you would use to describe your progress in sharing what you learned during LEAP 2 with your locals. And I ask that you type your responses into the chat pod that is in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you feel comfortable, please do explain your answer there. Oh, sorry, and I see that now you're just help make it a little bit larger so that we can see everyone's responses as well. So again, the question is, which one or two words would you use to describe your progress in sharing what you learned during LEAP 2 with your locals? Good. So we have a couple of themes. Some people are limited. Some have ongoing progress. And have found it to be helpful. And I like the use of the word cautious. That's an interesting comment. And I welcome you to elaborate on that a little bit more if you feel comfortable doing so. All right, let's take about 1 or 2 more minutes, and then we'll move on. But it's very interesting to see how everyone's doing. good. I think baby steps is often a good way to go. You don't want to make too drastic a change all at once. I like that. I think that's a great idea. You don't want to scare them. You don't want to make too big of a change at once, especially if it's something completely new. And so I think he had said baby steps is great and being cautious. But I'm glad to see that overall it looks like everyone is making some progress, even if it's developing or limited. I want to applaud you that you are all making forward movement in this area and working in that direction. So let's thank you for responding, and let's go on back to the PowerPoint. All right. So I wanted to share with you the purpose of today's webinar. As Larry said, we do want to provide some updates and some clarification on some reporting issues that came up during LEAP 2. We also want to give you the opportunity to share how you've explained and rolled out the changes to your local programs. As we've found in many previous trainings and webinars, participants seem to like to really hear from others, and that's the best way to learn. We can give you a lot of information, but hearing what it looks like on the ground is really the best way to get ideas for how you can implement it in your own state. And of course, things aren't always perfect, so it's always interesting to hear about others' challenges and successes to see if there's something that you can glean from there and use in your own state. So again, as it's been a while, I just wanted to very briefly remind you of what we covered during LEAP 2, since that's what you're supposed to be rolling out. So first we talked about the accountability under WIOA, and we talked about that quite a bit. We looked at the different measures. Larry talked a lot about the NRS table changes, and we'll touch on that briefly in just a moment. We also talked about some data system changes that are required as a result of WIOA. And then you had some time to do some planning for communicating your NRS changes to your locals. And so this is where we're really focusing on now. This is an extension, I guess, of what occurred during the training, and we hope that you'll get a lot out of that. So as a reminder, what is LEAP? Through the training, we talked a lot about these different leaps. First, you learned about WIOA and the new measures, and then we explored what it meant for you, for your state adult education program. Next, you assessed your situation, what was going on in your state, what you had in place, what you could draw on to really help you make some progress, what resources you might still need. And last but not least, we planned for implementation, and you created a state plan for doing that. So again, LEAP, learn, explore, assess, and plan. So during the training, we focused a lot on how to do this at the state level. But of course, it's a little bit different when you want to try to implement that at the local level and help your local programs do that. So what we would like to stress in this webinar is that we're really looking to support the locals as they go through these same steps. The steps will look a little bit different for them, but they'll be going through the exact same ones. So during the training, you also you learned about WIOA and the new measures, and so you're going to want to help your local programs as they learn as well. This might involve sharing with them through professional development what the different changes are. You might want to have webinars. You might want to do in-person training. You'll want to help them to explore what it means for them, just as you did explored what it meant for your state. It's very important that they think about and that you help them to think about what WIOA means for their particular context, as that will have quite a lot of influence in how they end up implementing it. You, during our training, assessed your own situation, and you'll want to help your local programs assess their situation, see what they have going on. You might already have some systems in place for doing this and for supporting them in doing this, like data monitoring. And so you'll want to continue to do that throughout this process to help them implement these changes. And last but not least, just as you spent a lot of time planning for the implementation of WIOA in your state, they need to now implement or plan for implementation in their program. And we will, I encourage you to support them in this work, especially as they face some challenges, perhaps, moving forward. Of course, it's very important to keep in mind, and I know this was mentioned during both LEAP 1 and LEAP 2, it's not about what you want them to know always, it's also about what they want to know from you. So as you're rolling it out, you're going to be most successful when you're supporting them in their work and providing guidance, and not always necessarily dictating what they need to do. Of course, WIOA does have some guidelines that must be followed, but supporting them and providing them with information that they want to know is the way that you'll have the greatest success. Okay, so let's dig into this process. The first step in helping them and supporting them is learning about WIOA. We spent a significant amount of time in our training talking about the changes under WIOA, but there have been a few updates since. And now Larry is going to share those with us. So Larry, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Thank you so much. I am receiving the magic mouse right now, so I can change the slide. Hello, everybody. As you know, if you went to the LEAP training, which I think most of you did, there was a lot of questions we answered. Spent a lot of time answering your questions to clarify the requirements on the tables and the policies. And we continue to receive questions that are either come to me or the NRS staff or Octave staff. And we've answered, I think, all of them on an individual basis, and there'll be some further guidance and summaries of these questions forthcoming in the coming months. But thought it was important to address a few of them that are really critical, I thought, to these tables, and that they maybe there was some misunderstanding or some further questions that we said we'll get back to you on the at the training, and we've consulted with our team, which is myself and an NRS staff, and as well as Octave staff, where we meet periodically and discuss the questions that you have to make sure we have a response that's consistent with policy and requirements. So I'm just going to focus on a few of those, and I know you might have additional questions, and I'll give you opportunities to at least ask them. If we don't have time to answer them, at least we will, during this webinar, you will later. We will answer them later. So I'm just going to focus on these 4 tables and then an additional issue about the secondary credential indicator. So there's a question about measurable, the table 4, which is for measurable skill gain, table 4B, which is our table where we report pre and post testing, tables 4C and 5A, which relate to distance education students or participants, and there was a question about the employment timing for the secondary credential. So I'm just going to go through these one at a time. Let me move to the next slide. Okay, I saw that one of the comments that one of you made on the first question Marcella asked was that PO, period of participation, is a foreign concept, and it is a difficult concept for us because it's new. And this is the first question that I'm going to deal with here, which is how do you report periods of participation in Table 4? And I know there was some confusion about that in the earlier trainings, caused primarily by myself. And we corrected that later. But now we'll want to make sure everybody knows very clearly how to report in Table 4 the periods of participation. This has to do with if a student is at one level, advances a level, and then comes back for second period participation. So for example, if they're an ABE level 3 and then they take a post-test and they're an ABE level 4 and then they leave for 90 days or more and they come back, so then how do you report them on Table 4 subsequently? And the answer is you always use the same row of their initial educational functioning level. So for example, in this example of the ABE level 3 participant, when they come back, even though they are now at ABE level 4 in their second period of participation during the program year, you continue to report them in the ABE 3 row. Okay, so they're always in the same row for reporting in Table 4 that they started with at their initial entry. So here's Table 4, just to remind you. And remember, the first parts of that table, A through H, deal with the first initial period of participation, and you fill all that out for the first period of participation. Then in subsequent periods of participation, you just update the table through columns I and J and K, J and K, J particularly if they get a measurable skill gain in their subsequent periods of participation. And then that last column K is how your performance is calculated based on periods of participation. So in that example, remember the ABE level student participant who came in at level 3, ABE level 3, they are reported on level 3 and they come back, and even though they advance to level 4, you still report in columns I and J their subsequent periods of participation. So I wanted to make sure that was completely clear from our training. And I'm sorry if there was any confusion about that in any of the questions or trainings. Now, there was another question that came up that we said we would get back to you on, and that was attendance hours in Table 4, which are reported in column C of Table 4. And it was, should you only report the attendance hours from the first period of participation, or should you have a total for the entire year of that participant, no matter how many periods of participation we have? And we discussed that among the team and decided the best option was to include all the hours of attendance for all periods of participation in column C. So a student comes in and you keep updating column C with the attendance hours for multiple periods of participation. So if they had 40 hours the first time and they come back a second period of participation, another 40, you would put 80 for that participant in that column. Remember, maintaining the same initial row that they came in. So that was another area that we wanted to clarify. I hope that is now clear. You always put all the attendance hours, doesn't matter periods of participation, very much like you do under the old WIA, was you put all the total hours. You continue to do that now for future Table 4 submissions under WIOA. Okay? All right. And remember, if you have questions, please write them in the chat box, and we'll try to answer them at some point, either today or in writing later. Okay, Table 4B is a table we've had for a long time. It is one of the few tables that was not updated at all for WIOA. It simply reports the students' test score gains for students who are pre and post tested. And under prior WIA rules, we just allowed any post test to be paired with the pre-test for that participant. And we thought about this to make sure we had it was a right thing to do, and we think it is. And what we're going to do is just continue doing that, because you might remember in WIOA we talked about how we didn't want to really you shouldn't really change your assessment practices because of periods of participation, and we had a rather lengthy discussion about what that meant for periods of participation. But primarily we want to keep pre and post testing the same as it is now. That makes the most sense for instruction and for student progress. So keeping in line with that philosophy and that approach, we want to keep Table 4 exactly as it is now. So you put any post test from any period of participation and you report that in Table 4B. So for example, if a student comes for the first period of participation and for some reason leaves and doesn't get a post test, but in their second or a subsequent period of participation they do get a post test, you can then report that in Table 4B for that participant. So it doesn't matter when the post test occurs. You can always use Table 4B. And as I said, that's one of the few tables that hasn't changed at all from the WIA days of yore, and it's exactly the same table, and you follow the exact same procedures you do now. So that to make that one simple. All right, next set of questions have to do with distance education students, and as you know, we report you report students designated as distance education students in all the tables, but then we pull them out specifically in tables 4C and 5A to look at their, in this case, their measurable skill gains and their subsequent indicator achievement in 5A on the post-program indicators. In 5A, we put that in. So we just pull them out separately to examine them separately. And a question came up during the training is when is a person designated as a distance education student? Perhaps is it the first period of participation? Is it a subsequent period? Is it any period of participation? And again, after discussing with the team, we decided the best approach is any time during any period of participation that a participant is designated as a distance education participant, they can be counted in those tables. What happened to the thing here? Sorry about that. We got to move that back. So in other words, anytime during the year, regardless of period of participation, if your program designates the participant as a distance education participant, then you count them in this table. You pull them out. And you just follow the same policies and the same definitions that we currently have. Those have not been changed for WIA, which is, that's in the NRS guidelines. And it's essentially it's your state policy, but it's approximately if a student is attending half-time or more in distance ed, you count them as a distance ed student. And that hasn't changed. So you report them in 4C and 5A. And this is for 4C, and this is 5A. And 4C is just exactly the same as Table 4, but for only distance ed students, and 5A is exactly the same as Table 5, except it's for distance ed students. Okay, the final thing I'm going to cover here among all the questions we got was referring to the secondary credential part of the credential attainment indicator. And I put on the top half of the slide the full definition of the credential indicator just to remind you. Remember, it has two parts. It is participants, refers to both post-secondary and a secondary credential. So it's the percentage of participants who obtain a recognized post-secondary credential while enrolled or within 1 year of exit, and the percentage of participants who obtain a secondary school diploma or equivalent while enrolled or within 1 year of exit. But in addition, those students have to either be enrolled in post-secondary education or employed within 1 year of exit. So getting a secondary credential also requires post-secondary entry or entry into employment within 1 year of exit. So that is that's a part of the indicator I want to talk about right now. A couple of questions came up about that. One was, is there a temporal order requirement for that indicator? In other words, does it have to occur in sequence? So do you have to get the credential and then the job for it to count? And the second question had to do with the time lag of a year afterwards. Did we really, does it really mean exactly 1 year? And that question comes up in light of data matching where you do by quarters, where sometimes the exact year doesn't correspond. And again, we discussed this among our team, and we decided the following would be the most consistent with requirements and helpful to reporting, and that was the temporal order does not matter for reporting and counting of this indicator because there's no mention of that in the legislation or in regulation. So in other words, for example, participant is employed when they enter and then get their GED or secondary credential, and then they exit. If they still have that job, you can count that as attaining the credential indicator. So it doesn't have to be that they have to get a new job or lose that job and get another job or anything like that. The order doesn't matter as long as all three of the requirements are met, which is obtaining employment, a secondary credential, exiting, and being employed. So the order doesn't matter for counting on that credential. And finally, for the year of exit, we know that there's data matching sometimes that might mean that the person shows up in slightly more than a year after they left. So I gave the example here of someone who exits in May and then a data match is done the next year for the April through June quarter. If the person shows up in that data match, we could count that as 1 year, even though you might not be sure if they got the job and maybe they got it in June, which would be slightly over the May period. That does not matter for this particular indicator, that as long as you're in the proper quarter, if it's 13 months or 14 months, as long as it's in the quarter, it can count as achieving the credential. Okay, so that's the clarifications, all the ones I want to go over now. As I said, there will be other guidance and questions forthcoming, and normally what we've been doing is answering questions specifically to the individual that asks them. So we will continue to do that until the final new guidelines are out and the final guidance is out, and then we'll have a document, I believe, with all of the questions we've been feeling that are relevant to policy. But for now, if you have additional questions, not to take up all of our time answering questions, please type them in the chat pod. We'll keep track of them. If we have some time in the end, or some are relatively straightforward to answer, I will answer them. Otherwise, what we'll do is collect them all and respond to you in writing about them, either individually or we'll put it on the website with this webinar. So please do feel free to write your questions if you have any other questions about what I discussed or other table-related questions or reporting-related questions, and we'll respond as quickly as we can. And so with that, I will turn the golden mouse back to Marcella, and thank you very much. Feel free to email me as well at nrs@ar.org or my own personal email if you have a question, or anyone at Octave. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Larry. And then I see that questions are continuing to come in. So as Larry said, we will get to those at the end. Of course, continue to write them down so that you don't forget them as they come into your head. Please feel free to either put them, I see a lot of people are putting them in the chat pod. We also have a Q&A pod above that you can use as well. And we'll try to make sure that we have time for answers to at least some of those questions at the end. Okay, so here's a chance for you to reflect on your own experience. I'd ask you to take a moment to think about the learning that you did both during Lead 2 and the learning that you did just now as Larry was sharing some updates and clarification. And just thinking in general about the learning process, the learning step. What do you think was the most challenging part of this step for you? And do you think, how do you think you could help your locals overcome similar challenges? We're going to open up a chat pod to allow you to answer this question yourself and to see what other people are thinking about this question as well. So again, please take a moment to reflect on what part of the learning step was most challenging for you and how you could help your locals overcome similar challenges. And please share with us your thoughts. I appreciate your honesty in answering this question. I agree that, or I can understand why waiting for federal guidance could be a challenge for you. Yeah. So Joanne, perhaps for you things are easier if we just focus on the new. You don't have the history of the old quite as much to try to forget. And then Maureen, it sounds like you have the opposite, that you remember very much what was previously the ruling and trying to overcome that or to change is challenging. I think you're making a great point there, Amanda, that one of the challenges that the states have been facing, as many have already said, is waiting for federal guidance and trying to figure out what the regulations do and don't say. And so now that we have a much more complete understanding, hopefully the locals won't have to go through that. think an effect of getting the flow or waiting for the guidance might have an effect also on adjusting the data systems. You don't want to make changes until you know exactly everything that needs to go in there. So it's understandable that our data systems are a little bit behind, and that could be a big challenge to track everything if we don't have the data systems that are able to do that. Right, and without having all the information, it was challenging to have accountability. So hopefully we'll be able to overcome some of these challenges, and as we start to roll this out to our locals and we can provide them with information, we'll help them to learn everything that we already know and help them to move on to our next step, which is to explore what this means for them. So let's go back to the PowerPoint. So the next step, again, in LEAP is explore. Exploring what all these changes mean for you, what it means for your particular context. And we spent quite a bit of time doing that in our LEAP training. And so the next step for you is to help support your locals as they do the same, as they explore within their context, whether they're a large program, a small program, rural, urban, how what the implications are of WIOA for them. So let's switch to our poll. I'm interested to hear from you, and I'm interested, I think others are as well. To find out how you've helped your locals explore what WIOA means for them, and also what supports would be helpful for you as you continue to help your locals explore what it means for them. So I encourage you to answer both of these questions, or to reflect on and answer both of these questions. And we can learn a little bit about what has been going on in your state. Great. So it looks like some of you are already starting to do some training. That's wonderful. I hope that you'll draw on all the resources that we made available to you through the LEAP training. And we do have a toolkit that we'll be releasing at the end of this month or early next month to further support you as you support your local programs in doing that. It looks like some of you are also encouraging your local programs to get very familiar with different parts of the legislation and starting to implement that by building partnerships. And it sounds like some of you are perhaps taking advantage of the fact that the federal guidance has come out a little bit at a time to help familiarize your locals with the information rather than overwhelming them, as we had discussed previously. Providing shorter, smaller webinars and trainings around a specific topic, I think, is a great idea. Yes, as Maureen says, giving them a flavor of WIOA rather than a flood, I think is a great way to do it. It looks like quite a few of you are excited about the toolkit, and we're very pleased to hear that. I hope that you will find it useful. I like, Amanda, that you said that you are creating some videos. That's good to have some lasting information that your locals can keep coming back to. That's a really great idea. An advisory council that's exploring the law a little bit more, I think, will be beneficial for all of your locals and provide some good information. And as far as supports, it looks like a few of you still have some questions that you'd like to learn a little bit more about. So I hope that you will either put those in the chat pod or the Q&A so that we can make note of that and try to get you some information and guidance on that as soon as it is available. And while it sounds that like many of you are already doing many of the same things, I hope that you'll look at others' responses and perhaps get some ideas of things that you can do in your own state that you might not have thought of, like specific topics like the digital literature and informational Q&A sessions, or perhaps try to put together some videos that you could share with your local program. Again, we're here to learn from each other. I think this idea of having some scenarios that you mentioned here, it's great so that they have an idea of what things can look like in real life, which is always important for locals to better understand what the abstract regulations mean. Oh, good. Jen, I'm glad that you're using our change style indicator, or inventory rather. It's always nice for us to know that you're using what we share with you. So let's just take another minute or so here, and then we'll move on to our next step. And if you do have resources that you are willing to share that you've mentioned here, like Amanda's videos and perhaps the scenarios that were mentioned mentioned as well, if you wouldn't mind sharing those, if you can send them to us at NRS at AIR.org, we can share those with others as well if they're interested, or if you're willing and they're interested. And perhaps we can add that to the list of resources that you are already making available. And innovation is always a good thing to encourage, Alejandro. Okay, so let's go. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt if someone's still typing. Oh, perfect. Okay, great. So we have a link here that perhaps you can I'll copy if you're interested in getting or taking a closer look at that. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint now. And our next step, after exploring, or perhaps at the same time as exploring, is assessing. Do you recall you assessed quite a bit about what you had in place already to help you implement WIOA and what you might be missing? And we'd like you to think about how you can do that to help your locals as well, as they assess what they have in place and what they can use to their advantage. They might not have thought of. There might be resources that they just need to reconceptualize or think about in a different way that would really be helpful to them. So now I'd like to hear from all of you, and we'll pull up the chat pods here as well. What have been your greatest successes in helping your locals assess their situations and what they may or may not have in place that is needed for implementing? And what have been your greatest challenges in doing this, in helping your locals to assess their situation? And hopefully we can learn from one another in terms of what's been successful and have some great ideas. And if there are challenges, perhaps others have recommendations for you of what you can do to help overcome those. And Maria says that political programs are still in the learning process and have not quite transitioned into assessing yet. And I think that that's fair enough. That it's possible that they are not quite ready to assess. As they're learning, perhaps they can do it at the same time. They might be able to think about what they have that will help them to implement what they do learn about. But again, if they want to focus on learning, I think that that's a fine way to do it as well. Okay, so Maureen has mentioned that she has put together, or she has some charts comparing WIA and WIOA, and I think that that's a great way to, if you can have them side by side for locals to see what they already do have in place that will help them to implement WIOA, and then perhaps where their challenges or what might be missing. And a SWOT analysis, like Jamil mentioned, is also a great way to help them assess where they are, what they already have in place that they can benefit from. Taking small steps is a great way to go as well, so that it's not a huge challenge or a huge burden all of a sudden trying to implement it. And Marty mentions understanding labor definitions that can cause some frustration. I think that even as we saw some of our own definitions, including superior performance, can cause some frustration. So, of course, when we're dealing with even more agencies, that just gets amplified. You have both a success and a challenge, or a challenge caused by one of your ideas of providing guidance for MOU planning, and it is difficult if people don't attend these meetings to get everybody on board in the same way. So it seems like quite a few of you have this challenge of helping your locals recognize that literacy is no longer just the focus of, or is no longer the sole focus of adult education. Not that it was previously, but a lot of local programs have that as their idea of what they're all about. And so helping them to reconceptualize what they do is a very understandable challenge. And a couple of you have also mentioned that that funding, or figuring out how to fund or who to fund, has been a challenge as well. So perhaps, as Chelsea points out, in the coming year it might be a little bit easier. I think we're going to move on to our next question. I want to make sure that we do have time to get some answers for you, or to take a look at the questions that were already submitted. I think that's a great note to end on, Chelsea, that your perceived successes will be proven or not. I like that optimism. Okay, so let's go on to the next and final step of the LEAP process, and that is the planning step. Planning. You need to, we spent quite a bit of time in the training planning and thinking about what your next steps are going to be. And so similarly, we need to help local programs plan what they're going to do to implement these changes. And I did say that this is the last step, but of course it's an iterative process. So as they're planning, they might find out that they want to learn more about certain parts of WIOA, or they want to, again, assess the resources that they have that they can draw on. So again, even though LEAP, in LEAP planning is the last step that we discussed, it's not necessarily the last, it's definitely not the last step in this whole process. So thinking about how your own planning process went, what part of the planning piece was most challenging for you, and how do you think you could help your locals overcome similar challenges? And we'll open up a chat pod for you to respond to these questions. So again, if you can think back, I guess, in a couple of months now at least, or a few months, to your own planning process, what was the greatest challenge that you faced, and how do you think you can help your locals overcome these challenges if they experience similar ones? So again, not having final directions from the feds was a challenge for you at the state level, but hopefully the local programs won't face similar challenges because they'll have most of the guidance already in place as you're rolling this out to them. And that the MIS, the data system, always does seem to pose a challenge in trying to make sure that it collects all of the information that is needed. And the point that several of you have made about figuring out how to provide information to everyone, that it is a lot of information and it does need to go out to a lot of people, and it's all, of course, compounded by the challenge of not knowing necessarily which programs will be in place next year and having to catch up the new ones. That is a challenge. And I encourage, if anybody has any recommendations or suggestions on how to address that, to please share that with the group. So it looks like in Massachusetts as well, you're facing some issues with your data systems. And hopefully this idea of having the siloed systems will be addressed as we progress further with WIOA, but that always does take some time. That's unfortunate, Casey, that other agencies don't aren't prioritizing data as much as you are. Hopefully having access to those webinars will help in Pennsylvania for your local providers to do some planning. And perhaps you can have some webinars specifically on planning to help them with that process. Let's take about one more minute here, and then we'll move on and start wrapping up. And it sounds like Illinois is also having a similar issue to what others have said about making information digestible, figuring out who to share what information with, especially because it's so much. Well, thank you for sharing, Rachel, with what you've been doing in Mississippi. Well, thank you for sharing, Rachel, with what you've been doing in Mississippi. I wonder if other states can also perhaps use this to their advantage. In Mississippi, they started a referral process where there's a form that sends them to another agency. It seems to be going well, it sounds like, in Mississippi, and so perhaps in Arizona and Massachusetts and other states that are dealing with customer referrals could use a similar form or a similar idea. Okay, or a Colorado's triage document. It sounds like it could be a similar idea. That's great. All right, so let's go on. I'm trying to be mindful of the time so that we do have enough time for at least one or two questions to be answered. Pull up the last PowerPoint. All right, so I know it's a lot of information, and it's very easy to get lost in the weeds as we're going through this. But I do want you to keep in mind that even though it doesn't always feel like it, especially if you feel like others aren't valuing data as much as you are, or you feel like it's very siloed, the idea behind WIOA is that we really want everyone to work together to help our learners get to the finish line, to reach their goals. And so hopefully as we progress, as we move forward under the new regulations, we will see that more and more. I just wanted to make you aware of just a couple of upcoming events that we have. As I mentioned, we'll be releasing the NRS LEAP Toolkit. It'll be at the end of December and early January. I know a couple of you said that you were excited for that, so I hope that you do keep an eye out for that. And then we will have a webinar on January 12th to help you with using the LEAP Toolkit with state and local providers. I think it'll be a great training of trainers, and I know I'm excited for it. I'm looking forward to it. I hope that you are too, and it'll be led by Amanda. And every training she does is wonderful, so it'll be great. All right, so since we have about 15 minutes left in today's webinar. Thank you for hanging in there with us. And I wanted to share or go through a few questions that we received, and hopefully, Larry, if you don't mind answering them for us.
Sure. I only got 8 questions related to the NRS, and if you have other questions, please post them about not just NRS tables and policy, but about anything we talked about today. I'm only going to answer a few of them right now because I do want to check with the federal team about the answers, so I don't want to give anything incorrect. But some of the easy ones, one of them referred to column C in table 4, which I mentioned the attendance hours. And the question was, do we count all the hours or just the hours from first period of participation in that column? And to repeat, in the attendance hours for each participant should be the total hours of contact, or total attendance hours for all periods of participation added together for each participant. So column C should be total hours per participant for all periods of participation. Okay, then another question was table 4B, is that just about educational functioning level gained by pre and post test? And the answer is yes. That's a table that's existed for a number of years. It's just simply about pre and post testing. It's not for reporting other types of measurable skill gain. And it's just the way it's going to remain the way it's always been. So that's the purpose of that table. I had a couple of questions about do you need 12 hours to be a participant? And yes, you do. That's a requirement. You have to, a reportable individual is a person who initially gets in the program and has less than 12 hours of contact, and a person becomes a participant when in a period of participation, or enters a period of participation when they have 12 hours with the initial entry date of their first entry or their entry for the POP. So yes, you do need 12 hours to have a period of participation to be considered a participant. I think right now I'm not going to answer the other questions because I would like to confer with Octave to make sure we have the correct answer on that. There are questions that we have had before and given answers. I want to make sure we have the same. I give you the same answer that's been given. So what I will do is we will email you personally with your answer. There's only about 5 people. And we'll also post answers with the on the web page as well. And then we have 2 new ones here. Oh, I have to read them off the screen. What about user programs? Casey, I do not quite understand that question. Can you clarify on that? Here's participation we're simultaneously enrolled in different programs. If you mean other partner programs, I'm just talking about to be considered a participant under WIOA Title II Adult Ed, you need 12 hours of Adult Ed contact. And I don't know if that's your question or not, but clarify your question if that's not your question. Okay, the second one is if they need 12 hours to officially be a POP, will instances of less than 12 hours then have a POP? Do they have to go to column C? No, if you're not a participant, you're not counted in any table in the NRS. So if it's just one period of participation for 12 hours and you come back for less than 12, you wouldn't be counted again. So it's only hours for periods of participation when you are considered a participant, and not if you're not a participant if you come back for fewer than 12 hours. Now, yes, that would be the answer, general answer there. Any other question on anything else we talked about today? No?
Follow-up if they're combined.
Well, why doesn't it show up there? If there's a combined 2 instances greater or less than 12 hours, total of 15 hours. Let me answer that question in writing. It's a little more complicated than I can give you a simple answer for. Generally, the answer is no. You would have, if you're not a participant in any period of participation, you wouldn't be counted. But let me reply that in writing because there are some nuances to that response that I want to verify with Octave.
Okay. All right. Great. So as we said, we will post the responses to the other questions on the NRS webpage, as well as the recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint slides. And I want to thank all of you for participating in today's webinar. I hope you will join us on January 12th for our next webinar. And if you do have any questions, please do continue to send those in to nrs@air.org, and we will try to continue to help you and support you as you leap and support your local programs as they leap as well. Thanks so much.